Hello, what's up, man?
Right on time there. How's it going there, Brian?
Good to see you.
Likewise, likewise. And preparing for an interview with you, as always, is so challenging because you go, so many damn projects. What do I ask him about? So I'll ask with, we'll start with the most recent thing, which is this History Channel Star Trek series that you were directing, producing, etc. How long was that in the pipeline for?
Uh, Probably about less than a year and a half, but more than a year. Yeah, probably maybe 14 months, 15 months.
Wow. Look
Yeah.
at the background behind you. How much of the series did you know offhand versus requiring research?
That's a great question. I probably knew about 40%, and 60% was either research or stuff that we unearthed during interviews. Like, I have a PhD in the Kirk movies.
Mm-hmm.
I have a PhD in Next Generation.
Sure.
I have, I'm talking about before we made the show.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have a PhD in all of this.
Right.
But before we made the show, I probably had like a good college bachelor's degree in the original series. I did not even have a kindergarten education in the animated series. I probably had an 8th grade education. No, I probably had a senior year education in Deep Space Nine, 8th grade education in Voyager, and shitty community college education in Enterprise.
I appreciate the improv skills of what you just did, comparing your knowledge levels to different educational levels. I mean, one could argue, well, he only has one PhD, so maybe he has to get that second PhD.
No, two. Kirk movies and Next Generation.
For sure. Well, did you grow up a big Howard Stern fan? This connects to what we're talking about here.
No. In fact, I didn't even listen to Howard Stern until after I got out of college. And I mean, I'll say two things about Howard Stern. Number one, he's the greatest interviewer who has ever lived, bar none, better than Walter Cronkite, better than Barbara Mondale, like anyone, he's the best. Number two is he's just, I love comedy, and I fully admit he's very funny. It's just he's a little mean, and I'm not into that.
You make a really good point there that a lot of people do actually listen to Howard Stern for the interviews per se. It's like when people used to have the line about reading Playboy. Yeah, I read it for the articles. It's that kind of thing with Stern, where a weird thing was the comedians that were his favorites were not usually the best comedians. His taste in bands and comedians were usually pretty bad. Like his favorite band was Enough See Enough, which is a band I like per se, but he wasn't into Radiohead or stuff like that. But the reason I bring up Howard Stern was that I remember an appearance by Jason Alexander in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Seinfeld was still all the rage. And they were testing him with Star Trek questions, and he knew everything.
Yeah. He's a big trick. I interviewed him for the Pretty Woman episode of Movies That Made Us, and a little bit before the interview and a lot after the interview, we talked about Star Trek.
Well, there you go. I think that you unearth a lot as part of this series as to the long-term impact of Star Trek. Something that I don't know because I'm not a diehard within the Star Trek world, but I get why people would be. What was the bottoming out period? What was the period where it was not cool and they almost sold off the franchise? Because I noticed that happens in almost every single long-lasting franchise. There's a bottoming out period where it almost gets acquired by someone else. Was there that for Star Trek?
Well, even though I would say Paramount didn't always do the greatest job respecting what Star Trek was, to put it mildly. It's a really good question, and I would actually say there were multiple bottoming outs. The only reason the show didn't die after 3 seasons was syndication.
Mhm.
So, I mean, the show was absolutely dropped like a hot potato after 3 seasons,
Mhm.
and then the syndication was the ratings after 3 episodes aired in syndication. That 4th airing exceeded the ratings, the best rating of any episode during the original run. So that's what saved it the first time. It bottomed out again. I would say there was a really rough, turbulent era right around the Star Trek V, Star Trek VI, which corresponded to the first 2 or 3 years of Next Generation, which were, I mean, the first 2, Next Generation is phenomenal, but those first 2 seasons are rough, like rough. So that was bad. And then it was pretty dead after Enterprise. You know, Enterprise got canceled after 4 years. To this day, it's the only one that happened to. And it was kind of dead. And it was only saved by J.J. Abrams's 2009 reboot.
J.J. Abrams saved, in my opinion, Star Wars and Star Trek per se. The Star Wars bottoming out, I would argue, would be like the Christmas album, which was one of the first paying gigs that John Bon Jovi ever had. Is there that kind of equivalent for Star Trek?
Oh God, I mean, half my collection is stuff like, yes. I mean, you know, it's funny, to this minute, there is an incredibly bizarre relationship between what Gene Roddenberry's estate controls and what CBS Viacom controls.
Oh.
It exists to this day. And as far as I can figure out what's going on, both sides have kind of adapted a lawsuit would be catastrophic. So there's like a gray area here. Let's just kind of don't ask, don't tell. But I mean, all you have to do is like Star Trek toys. Todd McFarlane is one of the greatest toy makers who ever lived.
Yeah.
He handles some of the biggest IPs in the world, from Batman to Disney, you name it. He announced a gigantic Star Trek line. They made 2 figures and then stopped. And I know that was caused between weirdness between him and Paramount, or CBS. So there's this very weird relationship with the products that get made. So sometimes they're very tightly controlled and it's all perfection. And then other times, you know, they'll be like, you know, a toaster oven with Spock's face on it. And you're like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
So it's really, compared to almost any other IP that has passed the 50-year mark, this is without a doubt probably the most chaotic ups and downs. Like James Bond has never had, you know, Daniel Craig's face smacked on a toaster. Like it's weird. It's really weird how it happens.
Yeah, good point there. As a writer who also covers food and drink stuff, I do get, every time there's a Bond movie, here's the line of alcohol that they're going to put out, but no toasters. Very, very valid point there. So we've talked about Star Trek as being a huge, huge, huge thing for you. But what's your number 2 franchise?
Well, Star Trek is tied with Star Wars.
Oh, so you're both.
Yeah.
Most people are not both. It's just you and J.J. Abrams.
Yeah, it's equal. It really is equal. Both of them added very important but very different things to my life.
Yeah.
Second place, if you don't mind, it would probably also be a tie. No, it wouldn't. Second place really would be Batman. Yeah, I think second place would be Batman.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you referenced it earlier when we were talking about Jason Alexander, the movies that made us. that is a staple program in this household. We don't miss an episode. Even if we hate the movie, we watch the episode and we wind up loving the movie. Like I told my wife, I don't want to watch Dirty Dancing. That I hate that. And I watched and went, oh my God, so many interesting things. And then I was able to use some of that stuff when I interviewed the John D. Nicola and Frankie, who wrote I Had the Time of My Life and that kind of stuff. So thank you for that information, that knowledge per se. One question I have about the show is the typewriter room that we see a lot in the episodes. Is that Comedy Dynamics headquarters?
That's Nacelle headquarters. Yes.
Nacelle headquarters. Okay.
Yes.
Are you the typewriter collector?
Oh, so funny. These are great questions. No one's asked me that before.
Oh,
That's I hate to be the guy to tell you Santa Claus don't exist. We rent all that.
now I heard this rumor that the most famous typewriter collector is Tom Hanks, that if you send him a typewriter in the mail, you might get a signed letter or something back. I thought you were about to say, I'm a typewriter collector. Yes, that's my room.
I own one typewriter, and that is it. Which that says a lot for me, because normally when I buy something like that, I become addicted and spend a couple of years buying tons more. But no, I only have one typewriter.
The movies that made us, the way I'm looking at it, there could be 150 episodes of that show. There's really no limit to the number of episodes you can do, because if it was a blockbuster, then there's going to be a story behind that. Is that how you're looking at that series as well?
Yes, to put it mildly.
So that said, no matter the genre, you guys theoretically can cover it because you can interview the people to really get the story, as long as there's enough people participating. Is that the biggest problem? Is it clearance stuff, or is it participating people willing to go on the record?
It's neither. Really, we were going to do an episode on It's a Wonderful Life. And there's literally, I kid you not, one person still alive that worked on the movie. And I think she's like 89 or 90. And we didn't do that episode, not because of that fact and not because of clearance. Clearance is never an issue. But because basically because there really wasn't a story there. So that's how we choose the episodes. Like, we like to have 3 or 4 quadrant films, but it really is there not a story that's worth telling? Believe it or not, some movies get greenlit and everything is smooth and easy. And that's very good for the people making that movie, but it's not very good for people making a documentary about that movie.
That is actually something I wanted to find out about, because after watching this, I just assumed I could tell you how albums get made. I'm not as well versed when it comes to film and television projects, especially in your company, who's had so many shows and films produced per se. An album hold up is like it took 6 months. Whereas a film, if it got made in 6 months, that's like warp speed record time per se. So I was curious what a film or two was that just got made smoothly and like, yeah, we can't do this because there's no drama.
That's a great question. I'm trying to think. Well, I mean, It's a Wonderful Life is one of them. I mean, and don't get me wrong, there was some wackiness there, but just not enough to do an hour-long episode.
And if you can't recall, that's okay. We can move on with that one.
That's a great question. I'm just trying to think of the lists. Well, I mean, one thing I can tell you is that Home Alone is one of our most popular episodes. So we actually looked into doing Home Alone 2. And there was like 1 or 2 things that were kind of curveballs, but again, it wasn't enough to do a whole episode about. So yeah, Home Alone 2 is a good example.
That is very surprising to hear. I would have thought that'd be held up by renegotiations. You know, what people got paid for the first one, they would think, okay, I'm not doing it for less than 10 times that.
It usually doesn't work like that because, like, if they're doing a sequel like that,
Mhm.
they know they're printing money. So I think Kevin went from like, I could be completely wrong about this, but I think Kevin went from making like 80 grand to 7 million between the first one and the second one. Plus, they renegotiated his contract for back end on the first one to get him to do the second one. So it, in many ways, those renegotiations are very easy because it's a hit and they know the next one's going to be a hit. So they just back up the Brinks truck.
The Brinks truck. With your directing style, I've complimented you on this before in other interviews. It's amazing how prolific you are. You know, the average director, producer I speak with, it's like at most 2 projects a year. Like it's really one at a time. And you seem to have created this assembly line kind of process, which blows my mind. So at this given, like, give me a range here. How many in progress episodes or movies, which you're credited as the director of, would you say that there are right now? Like 20, 30?
Off the top of my head and not including stand-up comedy, 27.
Wow. Now, is that because you have an assembly line process, like a checklist grid kind of thing, where you're more of like a quality control director? If you don't want to delve into that process, you have to say.
Great. It's a wonderful question. It's not an assembly line. It's not a checklist. What it basically is for a privately owned production company to say this to you right now is like a football team saying that they won the Super Bowl 5 years in a row. I've worked with the same team for almost 6 years straight. So, you know, you'll see names like Ben Frost, Ian Romaine, Robin Henry, Teresa Prindle, Nick Farrell. Like you'll see the same names, Brenda Carlson. Like you'll see the same names on everything. And basically, like any team in a sport or anything, you know, everybody has strengths and weaknesses. So, you know, I think I could be wrong about this, but in my opinion, you know, I think I'm very good at doing interviews. I think I'm very good at the pathos. And I think I'm very good at the just kind of shading the humor into a certain way. That's what I like to call an emotional humor and not a pratfall humor or a prop kind of humor. Like we try to be funny, but smart funny. But then there's other people on the team, you know, who are joke geniuses. There are other people on the team who are research geniuses. You know, one of the things that amazes me, and I mean, I can tell you I have nothing to do with this, which is like, we have people on our team whose like sole job is to find a clip from something that matches in with the VO that somebody said in an interview. So like in The Center Seat, you know, our Star Trek show that came out today, like there will be some person will say something in an interview and then it cuts to like a 2-second clip from episode 89 of Voyager.
Yes.
And like, again, even though I'm directing and producing the show, even me, I'm amazed. Like, how the fuck did they find that? Like, yeah. So the answer to your question is we are a team and we know our strengths and weaknesses. And the other thing is because we've worked together so long, like I'll be doing an interview or I'll be shooting something in the field and I know the editor working on that episode, I know what they like, and I will email them from the field, or I will type up my notes. I take vicious notes every interview, sometimes dozens of pages of notes, and then I copy the notes and email them to the editors. So that goes on, and it literally is like quotes. Like I could be interviewing someone for 5 hours, And there's one thing they say, and I email that quote to the editors.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, the editors kind of know what we want to do, and they know what I like, and they try to back it into that. So we're all kind of working towards the same direction, but from the opposite sides of the process.
That makes sense. Okay, well, the last thing I want to ask you about is I had the pleasure last week of interviewing Christian Finnegan, who put out a great comedy special through Comedy Dynamics recently. And I was curious about this one because it had a very different tone than a lot of other specials you produced. It was a little more story driven, a little more serious. You know, you see him cleaning the toilets there at QED per se. I was curious specifically, when you bought that one, did you know fully what it was going to be like, that it wasn't just going to be a guy being funny per se, that it was going to have this whole story behind it?
Yes, but that's a disingenuous answer. The reason the truthful answer is yes is because, yes, we watched it before we bought it, but that's not why we bought it. I used to be a manager, and I only managed comedians.
Oh,
and what I learned, I did it for 10 years.
Didn't know that.
And,
wow.
Yeah. And what I learned from that process was you gotta bet on the artist. Like it doesn't matter what I think. It only matters if I believe in the artist. And then my job as a manager, I always envisioned myself as having this sword, and I was cutting through the forest to help them better their careers. Mm-hmm. In this case, because we didn't produce it, we acquired it. In this case, as a distributor, I feel that our job is to support the artist's vision as best we can with marketing, PR, and flawless distribution. Meaning that when it's supposed to premiere, it premieres hundreds of places simultaneously all over the world. Mm-hmm. I believe in Christian Finnegan. He makes me laugh, but more importantly, he's got a fan base. And if Christian Finnegan doesn't understand his own fan base, then we should not be in business with Christian Finnegan. So if Christian Finnegan thinks that the special he made will be liked by his fans and hopefully new fans, then my job is to support that. Like, it's not to even have an opinion about it, though I will say I do love it. Well
said. Well, if it isn't evident enough, if you're making it, I look forward to seeing it in the very near future. So, Brian, thank you for the many years of greatness, and hopefully you have another sweep of the next Grammys. I'd like to see that, where you get the 5 nods in the comedy category again. You might be surprised to hear this, but I'd like to see that again too. Well, keep up the greatness there, and thank you for your time. Thank you, man. Have a good weekend. You too. Take care. Paltrocast.